Oh yeah, I forgot to bring that up in the last video. I totally forgot. So, like I say, my mother, she worked at the school. She was a teacher. My mother was a teacher, and I came up, being raised by a teacher. That's my mama. She worked at the school. She was one of the teachers. So, on a half day of school, all the other, students, they get to go home. They get to go home, watch cartoons, watch SpongeBob and the Flintstones and the Jetsons and all this. I had to stay. I couldn't go home. I had to stay with the teachers, sit in the board meetings, with the rest of the teachers, just listening to the business of the school. And I'm like 7, 8 years old. And I'm sitting in the board meetings, with the teachers, and like I say, just, they talking about, the business of the school, like test scores and all that, they was talking about that. So those meetings last about an hour. It was about an hour. And, I had to sit in and listen to it, and, like I say, just things like that just made me feel like a little bit different. Like, just set me apart, from my peers. Like, man, I'm sitting in these board meetings. Like, you know, I'm 7, 8 years old. And, like I say, this lasted for 6 years. From the first grade, to the sixth grade. So, looking back on it, I mean, it's cool. You know what I'm saying? It was definitely cool. It was definitely a unique experience. But I spent a lot of time around teachers, when I was a kid. I spent a lot of time around teachers because my mother was a teacher and all her friends was teachers. So, I'm walking down the hall, all the teachers knew who I was. So I had conversations with all the teachers. So I was around teachers a lot. It wasn't like I was just around my peers and, like I had a real relationship with teachers, and, so it was stuff like that. I forgot to put that in the first video, so I'm about to enjoy the rest of my day.